Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 113, and since I announced on last week's album of the week episode, which was episode number 112, which was a spotlight on the debut album from Anvil, Hard and Heavy, at the end of that one I did announce what was going to be this, what was going to be this week's album of the week pick again for episode number 113. And here we are, here on this Monday. It is the third full-length album from definitely considered a legendary British death metal band. It is War Master from Bolt Thrower, which was originally released at least sometime in February of 1991. So, where do I really begin with Bolt Thrower here? I guess we're going to have to go to at least the beginning of when this band was even formed. And that was all the way back in sometime in 1986 is when this band was formed, and of course their name being taken straight from, of course, the very popular British tabletop miniature war game or fantasy war game called Warhammer, which of course was published in 1983 originally, of course by the Games Workshop publishing company, which that company has been around since 1975. And so that's where, of course, again, obviously they were hugely into this, so obviously, again, it's where they obviously took their name from for Bolt Thrower. So, and the original lineup of Bolt Thrower here was Barry Thompson on guitar, Andrew Whale on drums, Alan West on vocals, and then Gavin Ward on bass. So this was the original lineup, and again, releasing their first rehearsal demo in December of 1986. So this was your original lineup, and this at least lasted through, of course, the In Battle There Is No Law demo in 1987, and then the Concussion of Pain demo in 1987. Then in 1988, the lineup would change for the Forgotten Existence demo, which was only one track, and this is where we finally get at least our classic lineup for Bolt Thrower here. That being, of course, Carl Willits on vocals, again replacing Alan West, and then Gavin Ward switches from bass to guitar. Barry Thompson is, of course, staying on guitar, but being on the bass portion, at least on the bass guitar here, is actually what many people consider to be one of the first female bass players in any sort of metal band, that being Joe Bench. And then, of course, Andrew Whale staying on drums. So this is your classic lineup here, and this pretty much lasted at least into the 90s for sure. But again, goes into the album that I'll be talking about here. But of course, then finally that leads into their debut full-length album in 1988. Of course, a year prior, they were part of the Peel Sessions in 1988, which actually was given a vinyl release back in 1988, around the same time period as their debut album. But their debut album, of course, was dropped on June 12th, 1988 through the Final Solution label. Again, it is one of the heaviest, the most brutal death metal albums to come out in that period. Sure, you had like Carcass and Napalm Death releasing stuff again from both from the same country of Britain, but the thing is, Bolt Thrower at times were on a different fucking level in some cases, as I feel, because of they due to a lot of the guitar tone and whatnot. Goddamn, they were just absolutely ferocious on that album, and they hadn't really sounded that goddamn ferocious, I think, in a long time. And I'll hopefully touch on some of that. Still, it was a great debut album. Then they follow it up in October of 28th, 1989, after, of course, being not very satisfied with their deal with Vinyl Solution. They drop out of that, and then they sign with Earache Records, who was just beginning to really get off its feet in this period. And of course, that's where we get Realm of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness, which is another fucking fantastic album. I mean, it still kind of retains the same sort of level of ugliness and just brutality of the debut album In Battle There Is No Law, but it's starting to get a lot more refined with this one. It's a lot more edged out. You really can hear they're starting to tightening up a little bit of their craft, but it's just absolutely fucking great. But it's still a fucking badass album. And so after that, by the 1990s, they of course released their debut EP, actually, titled Cenotaph. Actually, I wouldn't say their debut EP, because The Peel Sessions was their debut EP. But they released the Cenotaph EP as a way to kind of give a taste of what's going to come with their third full-length album, that being War Master. So let's definitely head in to there, because of, from at least Slaughterhouse Studios in September of 1990, they go in there, and of course with producer Colin Richardson, to pretty much produce and record their third album, War Master. And then in sometime in February of 1991, through of course both labels of Earache and Combat, comes War Master. So here we are with of course their third full-length album here, and let's definitely just run through the track listing here, because of this is I'm definitely going to be talking a bit about this album. But we got at least for the vinyl pressings here, there's at least 9 songs on the album. But for the CD pressings for the album, it actually consisted of 10 songs. So adding one additional track on the album. But I'll definitely run through at least the 9 songs here, and then I'll then talk about what was the additional track that was added to the CD. So the original 9 songs here, of course, it consisted of basically intro, Unleashed Upon Mankind. That is one song title. What Dwells Within, The Shred of Sanity, Profane Creation, Final Revelation, Cenotaph, which was actually one of the lead EP singles for the album, and then the title track, Rebirth of Humanity, and then finally Afterlife. So there is your track listing, at least for the original vinyl pressings for this album. Again, it only had 9 songs. For the additional track that was added to the CD pressings was a track titled Destructive Infinity, which was actually placed as track number 5 on the CDs. Because again, on the records, track number 5 would have been what would have opened up track number, at least the second half of the album, side B, being Final Revelation. But again, since there was no 5 songs on side A, that would have been the 5th track, again, Destructive Infinity. And I think it might have been added on more of the recent vinyl pressings or reissues of War Master. So again, with the original 9 songs, it would have at least clocked in at 41 minutes and 49 seconds. But for the CD copies of the album, it all clocks in around 46 minutes and at least 2 seconds. So there's at least your track listing. And of course, I do want to briefly talk about this, that beginning with the Realm of Chaos album, they began using the artwork from, of course, the Warhammer 40,000 stuff. Again, they would get artwork from them to use for the albums. Of course, that led into legal issues for like the reissues of Realm of Chaos, because of Warhammer 40,000 wouldn't at least wouldn't be able to let Earache use any more of the rights to use the artwork for that. But somehow they were able to still let at least them have rights to the artwork still for the War Master album here. And again, more badass fucking artwork too. It really definitely it comfortably really accommodates the album on this album. It really does. And just from this album, you really can tell this is more of a transitional album to what they were doing previously in terms of musically and what they're going to do later on after this album musically. It's a sort of bridge gap between the first 2 albums being In Battle There Is No Law and then Realm of Chaos, and then finally what was going to come after this album, I guess in some cases beginning with the Fourth Crusade, and then all the way into at least 2005's Those Once Loyal, which would be the final album for Bolt Thrower. So everything just runs in the sort of sound. It's that sort of bridge between what they were doing earlier and what they're going to do afterwards, which is basically slowing some things down here. I mean, you still got a lot of great sort of fast, aggressive, straight up brutal fucking tracks, like of course What Dwells Within, Cenotaph, War Master, Rebirth of Humanity, which really kind of harkens really back to what they were doing previously, especially on like Realm of Chaos, and fucking In Battle There Is No Law. It still has that straight up ugly sort of sound going on to it, but it still sounds a lot more refined, more fine-tuned, and definitely a little less loose, and more just, again, a lot more tighter in its execution. But of course, then even like Afterlife is too as well. All of these, they're able to really combine all those elements still from at least, again, what Dwells Within, Cenotaph, the title track, Rebirth of Humanity, and Afterlife really definitely are the ones that really harken back to the first two albums. However, with the very first song on the album being Unleashed Upon Mankind, you really kind of start to get a lot more of a slow, methodical pace going on. I mean, musically for Bolt Thrower, they're definitely not that far off from, let's say, other bands like Benediction and Carcass and Napalm Death and some of those bands. They're not all that far off. I mean, of course, the grindcore-ness is definitely not as much heard on this album. It's definitely still straight up brutal fucking death metal, even though I wouldn't really classify as straight up brutal, but I'm just using a term to kind of describe the level of aggressiveness on this album. You still get plenty of that, but again, it's not far off from some of those kind of bands, but it's just done in a way that I think the way Bolt Thrower does it, it actually adds. They got their own sort of atmosphere going on for them that at times I feel kind of separates them from at least Carcass. I mean, Carcass really began with albums like Heartwork. They definitely began to really go into more melodic directions, whereas Bolt Thrower, on the other hand, are just slow and methodical and brooding. That's the way they feel. Again, probably not too far off from Autopsy, especially with like Mental Funeral, for example, or Severed Survival, that kind of thing. Again, in many ways, I almost consider Bolt Thrower being more like the British Autopsy or Morbid Angel. Especially, I would say, the British Morbid Angel. Especially beginning with some of their later albums after, like, Altars of Madness, and then like Covenant, and Blessed Are the Sick, and then even that kind of things going on there. They do kind of flirt with some of musically the pacing compared to at least Morbid Angel and some of those albums, but it's just done in a way that feels more unhinged. Like it's almost just you know something is a little bit something's off. Like you know that there's a slight sort of harsh atmosphere going on. It's just absolutely freaking cool. I love it. But again, that's just based off off of the impressions of the first track. Because then when you get into songs like the Shreds of Sanity, Profane Creation, Destructive Infinity, and then Final Revelation, they all just begin slow and doomy. Again, I guess almost a very epic doom feel going on with the way they begin, especially with songs like Profane Creation and Destructive Infinity. They just have a sort of it's just slow and sludgy. And as the songs go on, they do pick up the pace, and sometimes they almost add in a little bit of a groove, especially in songs like Destructive Infinity and Profane Creation. But when shit gets out of hand when it comes to the fucking chaos, man, they do not let up. It still has plenty of that same fast ferociousness that you heard on the first two albums when in the middle of some of these songs. Again, with like Unleashed, and it does, and as it later goes on, it just picks up the pacing, it just progresses into it again, it's like a battle, a really bloody, violent battle that is just unleashing. As it keeps going on, it just gets more brutal and brutal, and it's fucking great. But again, you still get that sort of same feel with songs like The Shreds of Sanity and Profane Creation and Destructive Infinity. They're all fucking cool fucking tracks. Again, it's a very transitional album with what they're going to do later on and what they were doing earlier. And I think this is probably the best blend of that. Of course, I'm being biased because I haven't really ventured a lot after War Master. Because again, I'm just very familiar with these first 3 albums. That being In Battle There Is No Law, Realms of Chaos, and War Master. And again, this is actually the first Bolthor album I actually purchased. And again, I just love this fucking sound. Though I will have to be honest, I haven't really gone back and listened to this album as much over the years. Because again, there's a point in time here where it's like I'm not. The death metal stuff in my collection hasn't really been frequent players as it used to have been when I was back during like 2010, 11, and then 12. You know, they haven't been frequent players in my household here for a while. And I guess it's like here once in a while when I come back to some of these albums, it's like, goddamn, it's still freaking good. But over time, with War Master, it's one of those albums that it's like I've come now to really fucking appreciate, and I love this album now. But at the time, because I was so used to the first 2 albums, this one was a little bit, it felt different. Even though there was still shades of what they're doing earlier. But you can tell they were definitely changing things. It was what they were going to come into in terms of their comfortable musically and what they're going to do afterwards. It's like you get that, and it wasn't something that I was quite into. It didn't hit me at first. It just didn't click right. But over time, it began to grow and grow on me, and now it's just really fucking grew on me to where now I really love this album just as much as the first 2. It still is a very well just put together death metal record. I mean, both are, and in some cases, are on. I mean, I wouldn't call them generic. I wouldn't. Of course, I do have to say how I first found out about Bolthor was through Scott Waters of, again, Ultimatum and his No Life to Metal site. And that's wherein was this album. I just liked the artwork of the album, and it just sounded like this has to be something I'm probably going to have to check out. I just love the artwork and everything. Again, all taken from the Warhammer 40,000 game. Again, they all provided artwork for this, and it's just fantastic looking. Again, it really just fits the album. It really it's the artwork sounds like the album basically. Is the best way to put it. Again, I like the sort of pacing. Not every song is completely, fast for the sake of trying to be fast. It all has a nice sort of real comfortable pacing going on, even though it still feels a little uneasy in some cases, just due to the atmosphere, because it's just absolutely ferocious is the best term I can use. It just sounds demented, and I love it for all those reasons. But damn, each time as it goes on, it's like each song has its own character, and it's not always the same pace, speed. I love In Battle There Is No Law, and that's usually almost one fucking pacing in some cases. Same thing a little bit with Realm of Chaos, even though they were starting to flirt with a little bit of the sort of slower tempos. But still fucking heavy, and that guitar tone is fantastic sounding. It just sounds raw. I love it. I love that guitar tone. And again, very similar to what bands like Carcass was and Benediction and that. But it just has their own unique feel to it, though, and it sounds bolt thrower. And just you kind of were getting that little bit of Realm of Chaos, but with this album, it's starting to take really full head. And I've talked a lot about that. And again, as far as favorites on this album, though, I say the track Unleashed is fucking great. What Dwells Within, Profane Creation. Even the track Destructive Infinity is also fantastic. Then, of course, Cenotaph, the title track, Rebirth of Humanity, and, of course, then the final song. I mean, goddamn, there's really nothing bad on this album, really. It's just a straight-up consistent, solid album from them. And, again, I've just really come to really appreciate this album over the years. It's just a a very well constructed death metal album, and definitely some of both Thor's finest material. Again, the first three albums you really can't go wrong with. You really can't. So there we go. So after that, then of course comes in the Fourth Crusade, which of course had dropped in October of 1992, and of course it still consists of the same lineup, and it was still on Earache. But by 1994, For Victory, which was of course their very last album on Earache Records, would serve to be the very final album with its original lineup. Of course, again, being the final album being released on Earache Records, but it would be, again, the final album for drummer Andrew Whale, who had been with the band since 1988, would leave and would get replaced by Alex Thomas. That only lasted for at least one album, that being Mercenary, which would serve as their debut on Metal Blade Records. However, on that same year of 1994, Earache decided to cash in on the name of Bolt Thrower by releasing a compilation album called Who Dares Wins, which of course combines their first two EPs and two tracks from a compilation album called Rare Ache. Those two EPs were of course being Cenotaph and Spearhead. At the time, Bolt Thrower were very against the idea that a compilation album with their name on it was being released. They thought that Earache was cashing it on their name. Basically, the way they reacted to it was the way I think Judas Priest acted towards when Gold Records released, I think, both the Best Of album and, of course, the Hero compilation album. Again, that's the way Judas Priest reacted towards Gold Records, because they thought that they were cashing in on their success. Same thing with Lemmy towards United Artists for finally releasing the very shelled, what was supposed to have been the real first album from Motorhead, that being On Parole. Lemmy, I think, urged fans to not buy that album, I guess, too, because of he wasn't going to see a cent of that album. However, now that became a different tune. But I feel that that's kind of the same way Bolt Thrower pretty much felt towards Earache when they released the Who Dares Wins album in 1998. Again, Mercenary, though, however, would be served as the only album with drummer Alex Thomas, who had replaced Andrew Whale. So after that, Alex Thomas would leave the band, and then, of course, would then be replaced by the late Martin Kearns, who, again, sadly had passed away in 2015, and he was with the band at least till 2005's Those Once Slow, which would serve as the final studio album for Bolt Thrower, because at least sometime in 2008, or at least June of 2008, apparently it's not been quite to at least confirmed if they had recorded a full album, because of whatever they had for it, though, they scrapped it. Because again, they thought that it just wasn't really up to snuff to anything they'd done prior. It just wasn't, it didn't have the same sort of quality they felt. So they just were not satisfied with it, and then they pretty much had split up in a way, or they just gave up. They became a live band, but then they finally split up in 2016. So that's pretty much the story for Bolt Thrower. So that's it. But here we are with War Master, and it pretty much, again, it's at this point it's pretty much hit its 30th anniversary, though. 30 years for this album, though, which I failed to mention. Again, 30 years for this pretty much considered a classic British death metal album in general, and definitely considered one of Bolt Thrower's finest albums. It is, and it still is a very good record. So again, 30 years for this album. If you were there when this album was released and you were following Bolt Thrower from their beginning days, or this was your the album that actually introduced you, or you were introduced to them from Realm of Chaos, what were your thoughts when this album first came out anyways? Did you really love it when you first heard it, or was it really not up to your sort of musical standards? It just didn't hit you the first time. But do you have a different opinion now? So if you have any sort of opinions or just thoughts on this album, you can leave them in the comments section below. But if you haven't heard any Bolt Thrower to begin with, and you're just really are interested in checking them out because of after hearing all the praises this band has been getting over the years, just the overall following towards them, This album, Realm of Chaos, for the again, any of the first three really, In Battle There Is No Law, Realm of Chaos, and then fucking War Master here. My God, they're all fucking great albums. They're all just great, and they are all great beginning albums. Of course, then some within, say, like the Fourth Crusade, which again, I'm not very familiar with that album, so I can't really say anything on it. But if that's a great fucking album, if you're familiar with both Thor, and if it's just as good as this album or any of the first two, definitely let me know in the comments section below. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed this Album of the Week episode on War Master from Bolt Thrower. So, what is going to be next week's episode? That being episode number 114. Well, let's take a look. What is being scheduled for episode number 114 of Album of the Week? Well, it is none other than the 2001 album from Blue Oyster Cult, that is Curse of the Hidden Mirror. Looks like I'll be revisiting that album because I actually had that as a revisiting episode, which was a series I had when I first kind of started really doing a lot of reviews, which was back in 2015. So it's very going to be interesting how my opinions are towards the album as they were back in 2015. If they were different, is it changed? What are my thoughts on that album now? That, of course, was like considered the last album from Blue Oyster Cult before, of course, 2020's The Symbol Remains. So we'll see how my thoughts are towards that album. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrash Shed saying I am out. I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.